around 16, I started to do hard drugs. And this eventually led to me having extreme night terrors. So at 17, I entered mental hospital because I couldn't sleep anymore. So I see this big bright light, and in that moment, the only thought I have is, God is real. I get transported into heaven, basically. And I was just in this beautiful field. And it was like paradise. It was so beautiful. I knew for sure that God is real and that heaven was real and that it would be like that forever. I think if you look for God, you will and you might very likely end up on the path of this spiritual path of New Age. I mean, it includes witchcraft, it includes Hindu practices, it includes shamanism. So I have to say I was possessed again. It was a few months after I reached enlightenment that suddenly I couldn't control my body. It was demonic possession once again. It's what happened on ayahuasca. I was being brought into this black abyss. I couldn't see anything, and I was being tortured extremely on a physical level, on a mental level. I've never experienced so much pain, but I just felt all these spirits, and it felt like burning in hell. I knew I was being transported to hell. There was a little moment that I still needed to comprehend that Jesus was not just an enlightened master, that he was the Son of God, that a big cross just appears in front of me. And he came off the cross and he literally just stood there as this beautiful light in my kitchen. And I knew it was Jesus. So he was standing in front of me and he said, Anna, just follow me. With the most loving voice, he said, just follow me and it will all be over. If this is the truth, then I will be a Muslim. Like, I didn't want to be a Muslim.
Hi, and welcome to Touching the Afterlife. I'm so excited to have Anna with us today. She has a powerful testimony, and her whole life she was looking for love, peace, and happiness. And she went through an extraordinary journey to get there. And she's here today, and she's found it, and she's going to take us through her journey. So, Anna, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Julie, for having me on.
Well, I know you're going to share with us your story, and why don't you start with where you feel the Lord wants you to start?
So, as a kid, I went to church now and then, but it was a very, I would say, lukewarm religious atmosphere, and Jesus wasn't there. So I never knew who Jesus was. I had heard of stories that he performed miracles, but actually believing in him, that was not really a thing. And I I can't say that either of my parents were living in any way according to biblical standards or anything. So I can say that sin was very prominent in my family, mm, normalized. And so from a young age, and I'm talking from child till, well, 18 years old, 18 from childhood to 18 years old, I yeah, I was exposed um, to sin. And so at like 13, 14 years old, I started drinking. I started experimenting with boys on a sexual level. And I can say that all of this was kind of, again, very normalized in where I was coming from. So in my family, but also in my classmates and everyone. And even though it was normalized, I can say that I was a lot worse than a lot of my classmates. I was always looking for the edges of sin, basically, or even like going beyond maybe what was even acceptable according to worldly standards. So yeah, I was definitely very sexually active. And um I can also say that um my classmates were not the same. So there was already something that we could like, and also with my alcohol abuse and other substance abuse, there was something different about me. But why I acted in that way, I'd only find out later on my journey. So why I was so destructive, and basically in any sinful way. Again, I did not know God. We would have to pray as children before having our dinner, but it was more of like a little riddle that we would do instead of actually knowing why we were thanking our God or knowing who we were actually praying to. It was more like this riddle that honestly I was just very ashamed of as a child when like friends would come over. It was yeah, it was not something that I believed in. I wasn't, as again, I wasn't seeing it around me. So all of it seemed pretty hypocritical and hypocrite. Anyways, um, yeah, it didn't, the fruits of that didn't really show in my house. I do want to say, as I really feel to say that I do love my parents a lot. They did a lot better than their own parents. From stories I know, they've both had a really difficult childhood, even worse. They were both, especially my dad wasn't raised religious or in any with any faith, and then my mom was, but it was even more hypocritical. So yeah, I mean, with what they had, they tried their best. Um, but there was violence in the house there, and there's other stuff that happened that I will touch on later that would explain why I became such a rebellious teenager. And so that rebellion eventually led to my first experience of demonic possession. And how do I know it's possession? Is actually because around 16, I started to do hard drugs. And this eventually led to me having extreme night terrors, seeing figures, like dark figures, very scary figures in my bedroom. And they would attack me, like literally attack me physically. I would be moved around in the bed. I would be seriously attacked, not only on a on a mental level, but on a very physical level. And I could never really explain why this happened, but I do remember it often happened after using hard drugs. So that's obviously an open door for these things, which eventually led me to one day end up in mental hospital. And this was the first of many times I've been admitted over almost a decade actually after that. So at 17, I entered mental hospital because I couldn't sleep anymore. And this was also after the use of more drugs and alcohol and weed. So substance abuse was definitely part of a very, very big part of my story. Um, but at the same time, I didn't really know it was my problem or it was a problem because it was also, and it is also so normalized here in Holland, where I come from. And so um, the beautiful thing is, however, that this first time in mental hospital, being an atheist, as I said, I mean, being raised religiously, sort of, but at the same time, I wasn't a believer at all. So me being an atheist, going into mental hospital, I had my first very real spiritual experience with God. So I was in my room one night, and I hadn't been sleeping, and they had given me a lot of medication, but not much had been working. And I honestly believe that's because what I was going through is spiritual. And I mean, you can try to treat that with giving medicine to someone, but yeah, that wasn't very much working for me. So that night, I saw a big, big white light, and it was so bright that I don't know how to explain it, but it was still personal. So it was a big, bright light. It was so bright. It was like, I think I kind of could compare it to stories where people say one that they had a near death experience and they go into a sort of tunnel of light and it's so bright. That's kind of the feeling. I don't know if I was having a near death experience. Could have been. Could have been because I was on the verge of death at that moment. I am not excluding that from possibilities because I was not doing well at all. I hadn't been sleeping for weeks at that point and hadn't been eating well. I was super skinny. So if that actually was a near death experience, that could have, I could yeah, vote for that, so to say. But anyway, so I see this big bright light, and in that moment, the only thought I have is God is real. I just knew suddenly that God was real from being an atheist. Like that experience, just entering that bright white light, I'm like, God is real. And in that same moment, I get transported into heaven, basically. And how I know it was heaven. I mean, I even knew it in that moment, but I know it even more now because of what I felt, what I've seen, and what I heard. So what I felt was that there was no more pain. So I was experiencing a lot of torture being in mental hospital, a lot of torture just mentally from being attacked, basically, and being possessed and being locked up. But in that moment of being transported to heaven, there was no more pain, there was no more suffering. And I was just in this beautiful field. And it was like paradise. It was so beautiful. It was so like colors I'd never seen, and I was young again. And of course, I was 17, so I was young, but young being like 10 or 8, I don't know, like a child, like being able to play and be carefree. And it was so, wow, it was so beautiful. It was really like being a child again. And I remember God's voice, because it was God's voice talking to me and saying, it will be like this forever. And I was just there playing with my sister, and yeah, it was the best feeling. And then I got transported back into the room, and I was super, super, super confused after that. But one thing after that I knew for sure is that God is real and that heaven was real, and that it would be like that forever. However, I do want to say that in that moment I could not comprehend what I had just heard and seen. So I did not understand when this forever would actually happen. So yeah.
You know what I love, Anna, is that you were at your darkest hour, you could have been near death, it could be a vision, but whatever it was, the Lord in his love and mercy, and I love that he would do this for you. You were an atheist and he showed you that I'm real. You knew at that moment he was real, and then to show you what heaven is like. And so you're saying too, you couldn't even fully comprehend or grasp it until later in your life, right?
Exactly. I didn't see his face, but the funny thing is, I didn't need to even see his face, God's face, to know that he existed. And that's even the greatness of God. Like I didn't need to see much, but his light and his love and his grace was great enough to for him to show me his existence. Like that's just enough, right? His love and his light, that's enough for me to believe. And that's very encouraging, I think, for everyone, because a lot of people want to have an experience to know God, and some people do need it. And I
Mhm.
think God knew that I needed it. And that is, again, that is his grace,
Yes.
that he would allow that. He doesn't give that to anyone, and that is also mystery, of course. But
Yeah. And just to know that's how much he wants everybody to know who he is and that he's real and heaven's real. So, can you now go into you were at the mental hospital. How long had it been? A couple weeks at this point?
yeah, so this was quite in the beginning, but one important thing is that I was so aware that what I had seen was real, that the world where I was in now seemed only like a fraction of reality, right? So the people that were trying to heal me, I just realized they had no what was going on with me. They had no idea whatsoever on on what they had to do, basically. And so I knew that I was in the wrong hands. And for lack of time, we don't have too much time to go into the details, but what I can say is that I do not believe that these places were created by God. That is my personal opinion, and maybe even experience, is that I feel that these places often make people sicker. And that is what happened for me, because what was happening to me was demonic possession. It was very spiritual. I remember being possessed. I was locked up for total that first time of almost a year, of which I was even isolated in an isolation room for, I think it was 7 months. And I remember, actually, because I loved horror movies as a kid, so I remember this movie The Exorcist, and I remember myself moving like that girl, and I was like, whoa, this is real. This is not like this. So horror movies are based, like, can be based on reality. I was like again, like, I didn't have enough, again, maybe awareness to comprehend everything that was happening in that moment, but I did know, and I did realize, like, hey, this looked a lot like that movie, and there's something wrong. Like, I knew that there was something inside of me that shouldn't be in there, but again, I was young and it was still the beginning of my spiritual journey. So yeah, there's a lot more to it, but eventually I get out the first time of mental hospital, but hardly being myself anymore. I mean, being so drugged up that it was even like I couldn't think. I couldn't really move. I gained a lot of weight, so it was hard to even know who I was anymore at that point. And then you get like you're finally good enough to leave mental hospital, but they basically break you. That's when you get out. Like, there's no more spark of joy, because any joy that I had inside was being seen as manic or as something bad. So I was extremely, extremely depressed, broken, and all of that when I went out. And that was basically when they would say you're better. And that is always was always funny to me, because of course then if they also had to give me they never said anything about drugs use, which that was very funny to me. In later in my journey, I'm like, how could they not have linked what was happening to me? Like, even in the world, it would make sense that a girl that used a lot of drugs or whatever, maybe that is the reason I'm losing my mind. But they
Yeah.
just gave me a label,
Mm.
a mental label at 17, and that's what I had to just deal with, and that's what I got medication for. And again, we're not going too deep into it, but I think the thing was that I think that kept me going through all these years, because it's not the first time I go to mental hospital. It happens more than once. Um, is that I'm in this loop, right? But also because they keep saying that I have to take medicine in order to be better. But these medicine don't actually help me at all. They just make me feel so much worse. And also just having seen how they had treated me in hospital, there's been abuse, physical abuse, all of that. The way that they treated me, I could not believe that this was the truth.
Mhm.
So their truth about me was this: you have this disease, you need this pill, you need it the rest of your life. If you don't do it, that's it. And if you do it, then you're saved or whatever, then you're free, or you can just live. And I was like, no, but I don't believe that like, I knew after seeing God, after meeting God, there was more, and I was going to find that. And
Wow.
that led me to the spiritual journey,
Okay.
looking for
So
God.
there's good and bad in that, but mainly you came out with chains and bondage and but inside, because of that now belief in God, you knew there was a light, but it set the stage for more destruction, demons. Can you talk about now what happened after you got out that first time?
Yeah, so as I said, I was very broken, but I also I have always been a person, and I thank God for that, that fights even in the most difficult circumstances. And I think maybe that's why He chose me for this journey. I had always, even in hospital, I had this feeling of God having a plan. Once I met God, I also had this understanding of God's plan. That was like just deeply interwoven in my heart at that point. And so even the worst things that happened to me, somehow deep down or in another cosmic reality, I understood that there was a plan to all of this, that even the worst things that were happening to me, maybe God was allowing for a reason. And I do still believe that. And so after hospital, I knew that there was more, and I knew that I wanted to find it. So first of all, I was always a fighter. So first of all, I gained so much weight. I'd never been so overweight because of the medicine. So the first thing I did is quit the medicine. And I do not want to say everyone should do this, but this is just part of my story. I quit the medicine, and I lost a lot of weight, and I kind of regained myself. And I shortly went back into the world, but the world couldn't anymore very much satisfied me the way it had before. If it even had satisfied me, that's a question on its own. Honestly, the only happiness I'd really ever felt before meeting God was doing drugs. But after I met God, I knew that true happiness was in God. But I did not fully understand, who is God. So I mean, if you're in Holland, and I think in a lot of parts of the world right now, even in America, I think if you look for God, you will, and you might very likely end up on the path of the spiritual path of New Age. And New Age, of course, is I would say it's a large term for a lot of practices and a lot of things, but it is, I mean, it includes witchcraft, it includes Hindu practices, it includes shamanism. So, anyways, my first meeting with that path was yoga. And this was in a moment that I was dating a guy that wasn't making me happy. And honestly, that is another part of the story. Always dating guys that I was hoping would save me, but never did. Obviously, looking for love in the wrong direction still, because you have to imagine I had met God, but it was an experience. So after the experience, I don't want to say I had lost God, but I had not fully found him yet, or he hadn't fully revealed himself to me in the sense that I am feeling and experiencing and knowing him right now as we speak. But that's before a bit further in the story. So I am dating this guy. I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling depressed, and he's saying, my ex boyfriend at that time, why don't you start doing yoga? So I start doing yoga, and I'm hooked. And I mean, I can say it lasted, and this was at 19. I think until 21, I had gone deep into yoga. So over the course of that first time at 19 into until 21, I had gone deep. And what I mean with deep is yoga is not just the asanas, the physical practice, it's also, and it's especially actually about finding enlightenment, finding the God within, knowing who you are, becoming one with the universe, becoming one with Brahman, the upper God, you name it. It's like it's the same as Buddhism. I think Hinduism and Buddhism have a lot of overlapping beliefs. Basically, it's just different paths to finding enlightenment. I think that's the best way that I can say it in such a short way, basically. But I was into finding, yeah, because the promise is finding enlightenment. I mean, the promise is that enlightenment is the end of suffering. So the Buddha is the enlightened one, and yeah, enlightenment means the end of suffering. And so for a person like me who had suffered so much already in her life, and depression and psychosis and manic episodes and all of that, of course, all I wanted was to end this suffering. And just the promise of finding enlightenment was just very, very appealing to me, basically. And so at 21, I had actually found it. I was under the, how can I say, teaching of two yoga masters in my city in Amsterdam. Especially one, I would say she was a woman very influential in our yoga community, and she, yeah, basically you could say she was my guru. She was my teacher, and she eventually led me to find this enlightenment. But the crazy thing is, after I found it, just very, very shortly after, I ended up in mental hospital again. And the only thing, I don't want to go too deep into that, but it was very traumatic. And the very important thing that I do remember is being in an isolation room again, and just realizing, like, I don't know how to explain this, but God was talking to me through this experience, and he was saying, so do you now think that suffering isn't real? And do you understand that this path is a lie? Do you want to meditate yourself out of this situation, because that is not possible? And so I don't want to say that God said that in any like evil way, like, oh, now, like, you see, now you're up here, like, it wasn't his intent to have me in there, like.
And I just want to ask about, you had said that you originally found enlightenment through these two gurus. But then you said shortly after you went back into the mental institution. What was the catalyst that brought you back to the hospital?
So I think it's important to explain a little bit what enlightenment looks like. And so I could see it in my teachers. They were very, very, they had a very strong authoritative figure. I would say they had a very big ego, but it was all about not having an ego. So it was always already quite confusing to see and realize that what they were teaching was not actually what they were showing. So, as Jesus says, you will know them by their fruits. And so, honestly, by their fruits, I could have known that the teaching was false. But of course, I did not necessarily have a discerning spirit. So, what happened actually when I did reach enlightenment? I was in my room one day, I was meditating, and suddenly I'm realizing I'm one with everything. And I was beyond suffering. So, what also happened at that moment is that anyone's suffering seemed very to me. So, basically, if you go beyond suffering, you are, it's hard for me to say it in any other way, but you're becoming kind of a psychopath because you do not have very much emotion anymore apart from this sort of bliss state that you're in. And so also other people's emotions, you're like, yeah, suffering is an illusion. So if someone would come to me with their problems now that I'm enlightened, I'm just like this arrogant guru talking about how suffering isn't real. So not acknowledging anyone's feelings whatsoever. And that's also how my teachers were. People would come with very serious emotional and however whatever problems, and they would kind of disregard it because you can go beyond it. And so, how can this lead to me entering into mental hospital? I would say, I'm not saying it was God's will necessarily for me to suffer again, but He also didn't want me to stay in a world that is false, in a doctrine that is false. I think He cared for me enough to let me go to mental hospital so I would find truth, or at least be on my way to finding truth again. And I have to say I was possessed again. It was a few months after I reached enlightenment that suddenly I couldn't control my body. I Weird things were happening, and eventually I had this very strange blackout moment. And the next moment I knew I was in mental hospital again. And it's hard for me to really explain what happened, but I can say with almost 100% security, if not 100% security, that it was demonic possession once again. And I do remember thinking, being in mental hospital, like, how? I followed everything that my teacher said. I followed this path that was supposed to heal me and not never bring me back. How am I back? How am I back here? And so that's that. Long story short, I had to go back also in isolation room. I was extremely tortured there, but I really, really suffered there. And there was no meditation or practice or yoga position that could bring me out of that. And I even remember telling the psychiatrist, I am demonically possessed, which in that moment I knew I was speaking the truth.
Mhm.
But you're talking to someone that is not a believer in any spiritual thing, so that didn't help me, obviously, in that moment. I
Right.
was just saying, like, hey, I don't need the medicine. I just need to I think I said something like that. Probably didn't know the language of deliverance, but I probably said something like, I need to be freed from these demons and then I'm fine. But I didn't. I had the illness. I started to have the knowledge. I
Mhm.
started to have knowledge of demons. Like, there was some form of truth that God already placed in me the first time we met, but I didn't have the healer. I didn't have the one that could deliver me, and that's why it still lasted a bit longer. Yeah.
Yet, like you said, yet. So at this point, he's drawing you, he's revealing things to you. Where did it go from here? What did that when you told her about you feel like this is a possession of demons, what did she say and what happened from there?
So it was a man actually, and the crazy thing is his last name was Slaughter in Dutch, but still, his last name was Slaughter, and he was honestly a very evil man. And even my parents, because the thing is, you lose all the rights once you're in mental hospital. So it was very, very tough for not only for me, but also for my family because they had no rights. They knew I was in the wrong place. Even my parents at that point. My mom said she's never regretted more to bring me back that time because she was the one who brought me back to mental hospital, and they knew I was in the wrong. They knew, both my parents knew that I was in the wrong hands, even. And Well, eventually I do go out of mental hospital, but I was even worse than the first time. They completely broke me. I could hardly walk. That's how much numbing medication. They isolated me for such a long time that I mean, I don't know what I was at that point. I really don't. It was really tough to come back. And so eventually I do go home to my mom's house, but it took me maybe 1.5 years to kind of come back. The sad thing is, out of all of this, is that, as I said, my parents, they're not really believers. I mean, my mom, she says she's a Christian, but she doesn't even go to church anymore at this point. So no one, and I'm not saying this to blame my parents, because I see where they are, and that's where forgiveness comes in, but no one knew what I really needed. And so it took a really long time to come back to myself, whatever that meant. But I had nothing really to go back to but to go back to yoga and this spiritual journey again. And as I said, it took me nearly like 1.5 years to sort of find myself back, to get out of the rut. But I still had no light to turn back to. So this is, I think, the moment where I start to dabble with tarot cards. I mean, I just open new doors. I have an altar in my house. I pray to whoever, I don't know. I think I pray to God, but I also pray to Shiva and other Hindu gods. And it was a big spiritual mess that I was still involved in. And but I would say that my spiritual journey on its own was very, I was very isolated, and more isolated because I had lost a lot of friends. If I had had boyfriends after going to mental hospital, that would like just collapse. At 23, I go to India, and that was another crazy journey of trying to find enlightenment again and ending up in mental hospital there. And at this point, I'm like, how did I even find myself? Because it was almost like a deja vu, in the same situation, but on another side of the world. And I mean, it's just crazy to feel. And that was always the feeling, that I was in a loop that I couldn't get out of. It was like hell on earth, and I was just coming back to the same situation, trying. So I was trying to find enlightenment, trying to find, I mean, why? And you would ask, maybe, why would you even go back to finding enlightenment if you knew the first time you got demons and everything? It's because, honestly, Satan blinded my eyes. I After being so tortured in mental hospital, yeah, in the beginning I realized I had demons, but when I got out of there, I had no mind. There was only clouds in my head. That's how much medication they put in me. So
Mm,
there was so much memory loss and confusion, but there was moments of deja vu, of being like, hey, I'm in the same situation again, like, but I
mm,
had my teachers. And then there's the teachers are saying, oh, maybe you're not grounded enough, so it's always my fault, right? Like, I'm not
mhm.
doing it right, like I am maybe not doing enough yoga because I should do more yoga. So it was very confusing, and there were a lot of lies, obviously, because, as I said, I ended up in mental hospital again, this time in India. I mean, I can keep going, but that's just a story, you know?
Well, and I just wanna interject this right here because, that's all you knew. That was all you knew at that time, and it just wasn't the time yet for the spirit of truth to reveal all truth. You kinda needed to go through that. You went back to it because that's all you knew, and I like how you said loop. It is a loop, and but yet it didn't have an endpoint because there was no full peace, it wasn't the full truth, so you were on this loop. So, you go to the mental hospital in India, right? And then how long were you there, and then what happened from there?
In a way, I feel like God saved me, because I wanted to stay in India forever. I remember thinking, like, I don't want to leave this country, but man, I mean, that was so dark, actually, everything that happened there. I mean, I had seen gurus being worshipped, people being people desperately looking for love and truth, submitting to these gurus for years that will never give them what
Wow,
Jesus can give them. And so
wow.
I was gonna be that victim if that didn't happen. So I do not think God wanted me to be possessed or suffer or anything, but he did allow it, and he is sovereign. And so I can see that even if that situation was really tough, I was in mental hospital there for 3 days, but that is a next level mental hospital, right? Like that is iron bars. I mean, I don't know if any of your viewers have ever seen Locked Up Abroad, but
Mm.
it, it's like there was no facilities. I was sleeping on a bathroom tile floor. There was mosquitoes everywhere because there was no shelter, and so I had just had to watch the mosquitoes bite me. I mean, this was pure suffering for 3 days. There was a woman next to me that was already there for 40 years, screaming. She was extremely possessed. I have no other words for it. She was just screaming like it was so scary. But at the same time, knowing that she was there for 40 years, I was first very scared, but then I got news from them that my dad was on the way. And I don't know how to express my gratitude, but there was a rule in India that you can only be um, taken away from a mental hospital by your biological father.
Mm.
So in a short instant, I realized how blessed I was that my father was actually on his way to India, coming to get me out of there. I don't even know how he got there so fast. It was crazy. Like I think I do want to like really say how much I appreciate the things he has done for me. And yeah, I can almost cry. Like I do feel like God chooses our parents even in their lack. And he knew that my dad was gonna save me. And in that moment he did. And just still up until today, I feel like maybe one day I'll go back just to in some way, who knows,
I
pray
know
for.
that woman is still on your heart that's been there for 40
Yeah.
years, and I know that you're praying for her, and, you're right, there's yeah, it saddens me, you're this is a low point that you reached. Now, I know you also did ayahuasca, and was this before you went to the hospital, or was this after?
No. So I think you could say that maybe this was sort of the end of me trying to really almost. I mean, I had moments where I would go back to try to find enlightenment, but this was sort of the end of that serious journey of desperately looking for enlightenment and finding it, but then not finding it. And I do want to also add that at this point in India, I had shaven all my head. I mean, my hair was probably as long as it is now, and I completely shaved my whole head. So I came back to Holland being nothing like myself. I had to go, even in Holland, I ended up shortly after that into in mental hospital for a few months, but it wasn't as bad. Um, thank God. I think that time was doable. It was another hospital in Amsterdam, so I can't say I suffered as much, but I was suffering a lot with just the journey itself, right? I mean, I had shaven my head. I looked like a boy, basically. I felt like I lost all my beauty, all my femininity. I didn't really know what to do with this spiritual journey anymore. However, I was still on it because as we said before, there was nothing else that I really knew to go back to. So I still had my altar in my house, and I'd still pray to God and gods, and I'd have my rituals, and I had my crystals still. And I didn't very much at this point do plant medicine yet, apart from smoking weed. And why I'm say smoking weed as part of that is because for me, smoking weed has always been very spiritual. It would make me be able to go into very spiritual states and honestly just open doors to spirits. And yeah, so after that, I mean, my hair slowly growing back, very depressed, still sort of spiritual but very isolated, still doing yoga, still meditating here and there. I don't even know what I was doing. I was just trying to survive spiritually because I was a very spiritual person. Like I could not go back into the world, but I also, it was tough. It was tough to not have any. I mean, I don't know if I saw much light at this point. I mean, ending up in mental hospital for the third time. Yeah, I didn't expect that to happen, to be honest. I really, and that maybe that also saved me in the end because I always had faith that it would stop one day. But
Mm.
I just, every time it happened again, it really took a while to come back to that faith again and be like, it's gonna stop. Like, I'm gonna find a way. Like, this is not who I'm gonna be forever. I kept looking for paradise. I kept looking for peace and love and paradise. And so another thing that I would do is travel a lot. I would travel to, as I said, to Bali, and I would travel to Australia. So, but eventually that never brought me anything as well. So in Australia, I was actually kind of going back into very much destructive lifestyle. I was exposed to a lot of drugs, and yeah, eventually trying to find happiness in that area again. So I started to see there was also sort of a, a loop in. So eventually there was this kind of loop of like hard drugs, spirituality, finding enlightenment, depression, maybe going to mental hospital. So there was all these things I was trying, but eventually I was starting to notice slowly that I am not getting anywhere. I would come back from my journeys to Australia or Bali or whatever, thinking maybe I had gained something, maybe I had found a lover. That happened sometimes, but nothing would eventually bring me closer to any healing, even the practices of healing. And so eventually another trip that I went on was in 2021, when I thought it was a very good idea to go to Mexico. And here I knew that I might go and do ayahuasca. And I hadn't done ayahuasca before because of my history and because they warn you that people with mental illness maybe shouldn't do it. But I was desperately looking for a relief. So Mexico, it was a crazy journey. I think it was the first time I really saw, I met a lot of American spiritual people, and it was a different world for me in a way, because I think the way that Americans, and that's just my own perception, approach New Age is just another level. I mean, the knowledge and the language, and man, I mean, I met so many different form of healers there that I'd never met in my life. As I also said, a lot of my journey um, was very lonely and very isolated. So seeing so many healers and spiritual people in one place was kind of overwhelming, but at the same time, it quickly opened my eyes to the fact that something was wrong. Is that I realized that so many of these people were just lying to themselves. Like, it was clear that they were deceived in some way, because none of, like, I could see suddenly that none of them were going anywhere. Like, a lot of them were very broken, claiming to be healers, claiming to be shamans, and I started to sort of put puzzle pieces together. These are all broken people trying to pretend they're not broken and be healers, and but they still need healing. It was suddenly none of this started to make sense, but then it started to make sense that something is wrong. And so when I did ayahuasca, man, it was such a traumatic experience, very demonic. And honestly, this is not God's way. This is not God's will for anyone to find healing in that way. If you do not have a traumatic experience like I had, and it was very dark, like I went to hell. The first time when I said I went to heaven and saw this bright white light, it was the opposite. It's what happened on ayahuasca. I was being brought into this black abyss. I couldn't see anything, and I was being tortured extremely on a physical level, on a mental level. I've never experienced so much pain, but I couldn't see anything, but I just felt all these spirits, and I was, it felt like burning in hell. I knew I was being transported to hell. And so I think the tricky thing with ayahuasca is, and I even go back on to it one more time later on my journey, is that I would argue that it's not God's will for anyone to play with that, because it's an open door, and it might give you slices of truth, and maybe that's how it will bind you to it, but it will also give you a lot of lies and deception and darkness and open doors. And man, people die on it. And if you don't die on it and you have an amazing experience, you're probably very deceived, because that's what the drug does. It is a drug. It is. Long story short, after the ayahuasca, I was um, basically confused and lost again. And I mean, you have seen some truth, but you're still not at peace. So I'm still looking for love and for fulfillment in the wrong things. So I'm dating this guy in Mexico, and that ends up being a very traumatic experience on its own, and he forces me to do abortion. So I'm still a big mess. Like, I am nowhere near being a woman of God at this point. So I mean, is ayahuasca good for people? Is all the plant medicines, are they helping? Maybe for a moment, maybe for a moment of realization, but eventually I'm still this broken person. And I end up losing my way in Mexico and having to be rescued by my father again there. And so coming back to Holland, I I am again extremely possessed. I have done so much plant medicine that I am just a big mess. I go to Ibiza. I I I don't even know what I'm doing anymore at this point. I'm doing drugs, I'm doing plant medicine, I'm doing all these things at the same time. And this is the last time I end up in mental hospital. And that was 3 years ago. And I am so amazed that I can say finally that this was the last time forever that I was in mental hospital. And at this moment, I realize I have a serious problem. I have a problem with mind altering substances. I have a problem with this spiritual world I'm in that everyone is advocating for being the answer, but clearly isn't because it didn't help me ever. And so I'm in this sort of like recovery phase after the last time I'm in mental hospital, trying slowly to climb to the light and finally seeing light. And the first step of that was actually quitting any mind altering substance, so from alcohol to hard drugs and any soft drugs or whatever. And in this, I'm entering this program, 12-step program, and they are praying to God. And I have a very warm feeling with this prayer, with asking this. And it was God how we understood it, but for me, I think I was finally being brought to our Father slowly, like on a brancard almost. But it was so beautiful because I remember actually really praying, needing, being on my knees, needing help to be freed from addiction, to be freed from the need to take any substances. And so this was the first step to finding truth and love and finding God truly. And in this soberness, in this sobriety, my mind becomes clearer. It's harder for the enemy to deceive me. I am so determined, and not on my own strength, as I said, because I was praying to God to really help me to not fall back into using any substance. So around 6 months of being sober, I got led to, through a funny YouTube video actually of a guy preaching about the Bible. I got led to buy. I felt led to buy the Bible myself, and this had never happened before because we had Bibles in my house, in my parents' house, but I never thought that was interesting. But this time was different. I felt really led to read the Bible. I bought the King James version, and I started reading, and I don't know how to explain exactly. I mean, words are just not enough to explain the feeling, the realization in that moment. I mean, I'm holding this book that first to me always seemed like a boring religious whatever not interesting thing suddenly feels alive. I'm going through the pages, I'm reading what Jesus is doing, and I'm realizing he's all I ever needed. I'm realizing that demons are real. I'm realizing that there's actually something called good and bad, because when you're enlightened, I didn't even touch on that, but they say that there's no good and bad. Basically, everything is one. So the yin and the yang, yin and yang, that's the idea of Hindu religion and Buddhist religion. There's not really something called good and bad, that all is working together. And so knowing, finally seeing that there's actually a standard, a moral standard, and it's right there in God's word. And apart from that, just all the experiences that I had were somehow being explained in his word, in the Bible. I mean, Jesus casting demons out of people. I mean, all the stories suddenly in the Bible just became alive after everything I had been through. And I had also realized that the witchcraft I'd been involved with, the tarot readings, I mean, I'd been a professional tarot reader. I dabbled so much. I mean, even taking plant medicine, if you read the word, you see that it's a sin. You don't need to do anything apart from turning to the one who can actually save you. And that ended up being Jesus. So reading his word, knowing finally that I just knew it was the truth. And so I that was already like I couldn't do anything else than reading the Bible. And it was a few weeks later that I was on my kitchen, in my kitchen actually, and I there was still a small barrier between fully being saved and so between reading the Bible and being fully saved. And that was that I had been told over and over and over who Christ was, that he was a spiritual master. So he was an enlightened master. So I had for a long period, I mean, I had looked for enlightenment for so many years. I had falsely assumed that by reaching enlightenment, I am just like Jesus. He's not that special. He's just someone who's reached enlightenment. There's nothing. I mean, yeah, if you reach enlightenment, some people do miracles. So there's nothing too special about that. So there was a little moment that I still needed to comprehend that Jesus was not just an enlightened master, that he was the Son of God, that I was nothing like him. And so it was this moment on my kitchen floor, actually, in my kitchen, that I realized I need to go down on my knees and I need to apologize. It was just an internal conviction. It wasn't like the Bible told me to repent. No, that repentance was that came from my heart, really, so much being touched finally by the truth, by finally understanding that who Jesus is and who I am in that moment, and that is in that moment just a very large, big sinner. And I just realized all the sin that I had committed, and even the worst sin was thinking that I'm just like Jesus when I was in my worst. As I said, the person with no compassion, thinking that she's Jesus. That's
Mm.
just the biggest lie. And so I was on my knees and I was crying, just crying, like, I'm sorry, Jesus. I'm sorry, Jesus. And whilst I was saying that, crying, and the only thing I could say is I'm sorry, I'm having flashbacks of all the things I've done. Like there's nothing holy about me, right? At this moment there's no, because in the new age they always say like you should see yourself as a goddess and then, but in this moment I realize there's nothing holy about me and I need a savior. And in this moment he appears. I see it's like I open my eyes in the crying, and a big cross just appears in front of me, and the Holy Spirit, Jesus Spirit, comes off the cross. And as I said, it's his spirit. It is not like I saw blood or anything. Like he came off the cross and he literally just stood there as this beautiful light in my kitchen, and I knew it was Jesus. And again, I didn't really see his face, but again, another moment I didn't really need to see. I just knew there was Jesus. And so I feel like the first time that I met God, I met the Father. This time I met the Son and I met his Spirit, his Holy Spirit. And so he was standing in front of me and he said, Anna, just follow me. With the most loving voice, he said, just follow me and it will all be over. And I knew what he meant was the loops, the everything, the horror of my life. He said, if you follow me, it will all be over. So after that moment, I just can't wait to tell everyone, tell my family, tell everyone what had happened, and explain to them that I am freed. I am never going back to a mental hospital. I I am I'm with Jesus now, and he's real, and I just want to shout it off the roof, like his love and his grace just entered my heart in that moment. And I can truly say that from that moment I was born again. I think the hard part after all of this is that I was still alone. I had no real Christians around me, apart from my grandfather, who is a Christian, but more a religious Christian, I would say. But I do want to argue that he's the most close to Christ from our whole family. So I was actually hanging out with him a lot after that, just explaining to him what had happened to me. And it was just beautiful actually to get that relationship with my grandfather. And I would say that through my salvation, I think his faith got stronger, because I mean, he has, and I think that is what Jesus said, blessed are those that have not seen and still believe. And I can say that my grandfather is like that. He hasn't had any crazy experiences, but he's always believed since he's a kid. That's my mom's dad. So it was beautiful actually to see that like relationship with him grow, and even his relationship to God grow, his faith grow from just everything that happened to me. And he was actually one of the first to believe that I was freed, and I could explain that everything that happened to me was the enemy that attacked me, and he believed me. And slowly, I think in about a year, my family started to really see. Even my own father, who's still up to date, is not necessarily a believer in God. He has actually said that he believes, now that I'm walking in on this path, that I will never be sick again. So my life, even to unbelievers, even to my family and friends, that my salvation actually, what God is doing and has done in my life, is such a testimony for him. Because even my unbelieving, as I said, family and friends believe that something has happened, because they see it. They see I have changed. I have become so much more empathic and less selfish and emotionally healthy. I mean, I've not been depressed. I've not had any serious symptom of mental illness
Praise God.
whatsoever.
Praise God.
Yeah.
So, Anna, from here, you spent the next year developing this relationship with the Lord, but then something shifted. Can we go into that now?
Yes. So, how I would like to explain what the first approximately year of my relationship with God looked like was quite religious. So, I was studying the word extremely. Like, I had finished the New Testament in 3 months after I first started. I love reading, so it wasn't hard for me to go through the Bible very quickly, and to get a very quick, how can I say, to get understanding about what was written. And I've always been a person to remember things, like when I read them very quickly. So I would remember a lot of what was written in the Bible. And I would honestly become, as I thought, very knowledgeable in the word. But my problem was that I was still a very on my own person. It was so hard for me to stick to a church. I would go from one church to the next and never really finding peace to where I wanted to plant myself. And I think this was also due to fear of being in the wrong hands again after everything that happened. And in a way, I think it came from pride as well. I had gained so much knowledge through all my experience about the spirit world, that I thought that I was like, when I read the Bible, I thought that I had knowledge that maybe no other Christian could have. And in a way, that could be true, but I was not utilizing that in the right way. And so I became maybe unconsciously quite arrogant, that I wouldn't be able to find a church, because no church would really reflect what I was learning in the Bible, what I had been learning. And so I think I read the Bible in the wrong way, because now that I read the Bible, I can say that the Bible's all about the church, and we all need the body. Christ is the body, right? It's the body of believers. And so I had no real discipleship. I had no real spiritual father or mother or anyone that was really able to help me. And I think a combination of that a combination of having still fear to fall in the wrong hands, and not because I was reading the Bible on my own. I probably didn't have the full understanding of what it really means to be a follower of Christ, what it really means to live in faith and to walk in faith and to have the gifts of the Spirit and be able to perform miracles and be able to receive miracles. And even if my own salvation was a miracle on its own, I think I quickly forgot that. Or maybe I just took that as a one moment experience, but then quickly I became quite religious, just wanting to do it the right way within my own understanding. So it was starting to be works based again. And as I said, a very isolated journey once again, which that eventually did not bring much good. I think I tried to find a church, as I said, but it just, with that attitude of like the church needs to be perfect, otherwise I'm not going to go, that didn't help me. That did not help me. And I ended up eventually being alone. I had made Christian friends, and thank God, because they are the best sisters I have ever had. And I still have them up until today. I've had made, thanks to God, so many, I've met so many beautiful people on the journey already, but not having a physical church. Um, Eventually, I think that was the biggest reason why I was deceived again. And I think I can see clearly now that it's not something that I have to be ashamed of. I think I think it happens more than maybe people want to admit, or that is talked about within our community, Christian community. Um, but as I said, I just wanted to do God's will, and I was always still just longing for the truth above anything. Like it doesn't matter what I think; it matters what the truth is, and it matters what God what God wants. How can I say it? It matters what God wants for us to know as the truth, who He really is. And so it was in September or October, no, it was October of 2023 when I had a conversation with a guy who I had once met in mental hospital. And this guy was actually just admitted out of jail. And so he texted me, and I didn't even have his number, but he had mine. He texted me, and we were talking, and I'm not talking about like a weird way, just like friendly talking. And he was explaining he's been in jail. And I mean, I'd been to so many different situations in my life. I'm not a person to judge quickly. Even if someone would say I just got out of jail, I'm like, come to Anna, just talk, let's talk. So he was explaining what happened. It was pretty intense. And I said, you know what what really saved me? Because at this point I'm already 2 years out of mental hospital, and he's still in his mess, right? So I'm like, who really saved me? And I'm like, Jesus. And I'm trying to evangelize to him, but that quickly goes the other direction when he tells me that as a Muslim he believes in Jesus. And out of all faiths that I had dabbled in, Islam was not one of them, ever, not even close. I had never had interest in even understanding what they believed at all. So when he said that he believed in Jesus and Muslims believe in Jesus, I was a bit surprised. Like, I didn't know that. So I told him, I said, oh, okay, but what do you believe? And and this quickly led to me saying, well, I'm open to know. And I think these words are important because with me saying I'm open, I really feel in that moment I opened myself to that doctrine. I was humble. I was so humble that it was dangerous. I think maybe humbleness is not a word, maybe it's naivety. I said I'm open. I want to know. Because I'd always, as you hear from my story, I'd always want to know if there's more to truth. And at this point, I'm alone already for a while. So I
I just
think
wanna add in right here, we can see what's happening, we see where you're gonna go with this, and it's like the enemy, those demons your whole life knew your buttons, knew what was gonna get you, and knew your vulnerabilities, and this is where they come in, this is how the devil works and how he wants to lure you back.
exactly. Exactly. And I think, as I said, because I was on my own already quite at this point, not having a church, I think I was an easy target. I was an easy target. And as you said, the devil knows where he can get you. And I think my honest quest for truth beyond everything eventually led me to also be open to the Muslim faith. I do want to add that my love for Jesus was very real and very serious. And transitioning to the Muslim faith was very painful, very painful. What I remember is that I would start to watch YouTube videos explaining why Muslim faith is real instead of Christianity. So basically testimonies or whatever. I honestly I didn't find that much, but I did find I don't know what they are called. So the people that preach for the Muslim faith, let me think. Well, it doesn't really matter, but I found like the Muslim teachers basically, and they would explain who Jesus is according to the Quran. And I mean, the way they would debunk the Bible seemed so real, like so smart. Like it definitely I had to start to believe it. But I was being deceived, obviously. Like the scriptures from the Bible they would use to debunk who Christ says he is would make sense to me. And so I would, there was a moment where I would just, I remember praying to God and say, like, "Eh, if this is the truth, then I will be a Muslim. Like, I didn't want to be a Muslim. Like, that's nothing fancy at all here in Holland. I mean, there's nothing fancy about it. Like, I knew I would have to wear a headscarf. Like, I was gonna go full in if I'm gonna be a Muslim. I'm not gonna do it half. Like that would be way harder to explain to my family. There was nothing in it for me. I just wanted truth. And I, at that moment, thought maybe this is the truth. And I remember there was a moment I was standing in my bathroom and Jesus was standing next to me. I really saw his spirit. And the moment I said, okay, I'm going to believe in the Muslim faith, there was this moment. I just remember like poof, him disappearing, like Jesus as my friend. Because in the Muslim faith, Jesus is not your friend. He is a prophet. And but he's not your friend and he's not God. So the moment I decided I'm not going to believe Christian faith, I'm going to go into Muslim faith, I lost Jesus and I cried. I really cried. Even in that moment when I thought it was all an illusion, I still cried because I had lost my best friend that I had for a year. That did so much for me. So there was a real loss in that moment. Eventually, being a Muslim only lasted 3 weeks because, man, that was tough. And it made me realize the difference between religion and relationship. And maybe, as I said, I had to go through it. There was even a moment just before I decided to do my Shahada, my declaration of the Muslim faith. There was a moment where I realized that if I'm wrong doing this is going to be a testimony for God. Still, it's going to be a testimony for Christ. There was this moment of realization. But you have to even imagine that doing the declaration of the Muslim faith was very, very scary. And why I'm saying this is because either you believe in Christ and you go to heaven, or you don't believe in Christ and you go to hell. So but in the Muslim faith, if you believe in Christ, you will go to hell. So I was standing on this like impossible choice. So basically, if I choose to be a Muslim, but I'm wrong, I'll go to hell. But if I, well, you get the point. Anyway, so it was very, it was honestly quite traumatic, all of it. So scary on a spiritual level. And being a Muslim for 3 weeks, I soon started to realize I had made the wrong choice because I would meet Muslim people and they would seem very nice, but they would admit they were all doing it to get favor from Allah. So none of it was actually loving. Even if they would act lovingly, it was to get favor from Allah. Whilst when I was being helped by Christians, I remember the difference is that it would come from love because they had no one to prove anything to. They had already been saved. So they like the difference between doing something because you want praise from your God and doing something because you have already gotten grace is so that's the biggest difference. And so working my way to heaven for 3 weeks, praying 5 times a day, praying in Arabic. I mean, you couldn't even pray in your own language. I even remember doing the prayers and remembering how it felt doing yoga. Like, you cannot make mistakes. You have to do all the positions the right way. And this was even worse because your prayer doesn't count if you don't pray the right way. Honestly, it only lasted 3 weeks because I had a conversation. Finally, I started to be so unhappy, and I had a conversation with my father. I mean, I'm already wearing headscarf. I'm fully covered at this point. I'm having a conversation with my father, and I'm telling him like, "Hey, I became a Muslim," and he's like, "When you became a Christian, I really felt that was good, but now, yeah, I don't know." Like he wasn't like saying I shouldn't do anything, but he was just like trying to mirror maybe some truth to me. I really do feel that God used my father at that point because I was telling my father, yeah, and I'm thinking of wearing a headscarf. I was already wearing one. And then at that moment, my dad just says, I think you can do what you want, of course, but I think you're going to be very, very unhappy. And it just clicked in that moment because I realized I am very, very unhappy. And at that moment, he says, why don't you just believe in God then without following any religion? And so we go to the next moment of my lost,
Mm.
yeah, the next 5 weeks until, yeah, finding Christ again or until Christ saves me again.
Which I think is I can't wait to hear this part too, because this is the real final deal. This it's solid now. So, but what I just want to say about your dad is I think it's profound how he got the Lord used him to bring you out of it. But then the Lord used you for your dad because he saw something in you that was different when you were walking with Christ than when you were in the Muslim faith for 3 weeks. So I just think that is profound. And anyway, God bless your dad. And I hope that he knows the Lord one day deeply. So, okay, I'm sorry. I just got touched by that moment. So if you could then now go into that part of what happens after that conversation with your dad.
Yeah, so this is a bit tricky because I definitely do feel God used my father, but of course he's not a believer, so he could only be used as much. And that is okay. I think it's still perfect. I mean, God's plan still worked out eventually. So, anyways, my dad says, "Why? Well, if you don't want to be a Christian anymore, you don't want to be a Muslim, why don't you just follow God or believe in God in your own way?" And I think anyone listening right now can understand where we're going with this. If you just believe in God without any box, without any safety box, safety frame, you're gonna, one way or another, I'm gonna tell you, fall back or fall into New Age. Because New Age is a concept of you can just believe whatever. There's God, like most New Agers believe in any some form of God, universe or whatever, but there's no religion. And I think in New Age we're so afraid of religion because we think it's taking away our freedom. But no, I think religion, Christian religion in its purest form, is our safety net. It is what keeps us safe spiritually. It is what keeps us away from following all the false doctrines, all the, I mean, keeping us away from demonic doors, basically. So it's a safety box. There's nothing like it is actual freedom. But yeah, so for the last time, maybe to truly understand, truly understand that what I do now is that I did fall back into New Age whilst I was saying I'm not falling back into New Age. So I am meditating right after the call of my dad. I'm sitting in cross-leg position and I'm praying slash meditating. Why I'm saying praying slash meditating, I'm sitting like that, basically, with my hands like that. And I'm like, God, just show me who you are. But at that moment, I am not gonna follow any religion. I just said that. I just said that. So I reached a state of oneness for the last time. I would say similar to before, where I reached a state of enlightenment, thinking that I'm just like Jesus. And so for the next 5 weeks, I am slowly, but no, actually very fast falling back into a lot of modalities that are not safe. I slowly go back into doing yoga. I slowly go back into meditating. I am thinking I'm enlightened master beyond anything I'd ever been before, because now I had a concept of sin. So I'm sort of a Christian enlightened saint master. It was a big mess. I mean, what I thought I was at that moment. I thought I'm a shaman. I fell back into doing plant medicine. I mean, this is all in just 5 weeks. I I get into back into touch with one of my old best new guy friends, new best guy new age friends that I had uh, fellowship with along my journey already for 6 years or something like that. And he was very much into crystals. So I go back into crystals. I mean, this all happens in 5 weeks. I do mushrooms. I do rapé medicine. I am thinking I need healing. I'm doing healing work. I mean, it's all witchcraft. And I mean, it ends up being a big mess. I think I need more healing. I mean, I'm in this loop again. It is just short, but it's almost like 2 months, right? 3 weeks of Muslim and 5 weeks of falling back into New Age spirituality again. I mean, so much happened in just those 2 months. I mean, dangerous things happened again. I died in those 2 months nearly twice because I was overdosing on this rapé medicine. I want to say I didn't have, because I believe that God has healed me fully, physically and mentally. But at that point, my kidneys were very weak and I had kidney failure and I literally nearly died, to the point I was almost brought to not to mental, to a hospital, because I overdosed on plant medicine that these spirits were telling me to take a lot of. I was communicating with spirits that I know now that are demons, that were telling me to take whatever they were telling me to take. So I would take mushrooms, and eventually they also told me to do ayahuasca again. So at that point, I'm just fully, I'm not even close to God anymore. There's no, I knew that because these spirits were now my gods. They were telling me what I should do, what plant medicine, drug I should take. And I'm really, I don't even like, honestly, it's a miracle. And I think it wasn't God's will, because he promised me I'd never go back to mental hospital. So at this moment, I don't think I was demonically possessed, but I was definitely deceived. Thank God. Because the first time he gave me his Holy Spirit, I do not think that he left me. But at the same time, through my own free will, I chose to go back into doing witchcraft, into doing all these things. And so that didn't make me safe. Maybe I wasn't possessed, but I was definitely oppressed, and I wasn't safe at all because of my own free will. And God, even after salvation, gives us free will. That's because he's loving. He doesn't tie us to his rules or anything. And we just have to realize they're not rules, they're safety nets. That's the difference, right? Anyway, so eventually living that lifestyle again, just doing whatever these spirits are telling me, thinking I'm healing myself, just becoming a big mess, nearly dying again. I mean, it was a mess. I eventually do ayahuasca. And during the ayahuasca, I have a vision of having a child, having a baby girl with this guy friend that I'm seeing again. And at this point, we're just friends. I mean, as I said, he's into crystals. We're just doing stuff with crystals. We're doing shamanic healings together and all of these things. But when I had this vision on the ayahuasca that we're going to have a child together, suddenly something changed. But the Bible warns us that our heart is deceitful and we're not ought to lean on our own understanding. And again, I don't think we're ought to take any substance to go in, like as you said, to illegally go into the spirit realm, because I mean that can just go very, very wrong. And by the grace of God, eventually, yeah, how can I say? Maybe I'll go too fast to end the story like that. But what I can say is that night I went to see my friend. I told him the vision. I told him that I saw that we were going to have a child together and that I felt love for him. It was the first time I had felt love for him, but I would say it was definitely drug induced, the feeling. And he admitted that he's always had feelings for me. And in that night, I conceived, and we both knew that I conceived a child. So again, there's truth. There's real truth in ayahuasca because you really do enter the spirit realm, and it's a real realm. And 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 why God allowed this, why God even maybe works through our sin, that is only God. I think that only God knows why. Uh, Maybe I will learn more later on my journey, but there was truth in it. I did conceive. But after 2 days after the ayahuasca worn out, I did not feel any attraction or love. Or I mean, I love this person as a friend, but like this like love, from the heart, this like passionate love, that was drug induced. And so after that worn off, we did some mushrooms together, and I'm like, I don't think we should continue in a relationship. And honestly, I was deceived because the spirits on the mushrooms were telling me I wasn't pregnant. So I was taking more of this rapé medicine, and even while I had already conceived, they were telling me I didn't conceive. And so I was just living very unwisely, taking rapé medicine, which is very harsh form of tobacco that you sniff in your nose. This was a moment I nearly died, even whilst already being pregnant. So there was definitely an attack on my life. And that was not the first time. I think I left that out in the testimony, but I had died a few times almost on my journey, very closely, where I'd hear Jesus' voice talk to me. And so even this time, I knew I was close to death, but there was nothing there. There was no voice there. I just Jesus was silent, God was silent, and but I started to realize I'm making a big mess. And so eventually it ends up being a big drama. My friend leaves. I don't know what to do. I call a friend and I say, I think I have made a big mess. I don't even know where to start. She knew I became a Muslim. I said, I think you need to pray for me. I don't even know how I got back here. I don't even know what happened. I don't even know how I got back here. I really do not. She prayed for me. And in this moment, finally, after 2 months, I feel Jesus' spirit again, his peace and his love. And I'm just like, oh, I miss you so much. And it was just one prayer that brought me back to faith. It
Mm.
was so strong. He worked so strongly through her. And if immediately I contact my other Christian sisters and anyone who prayed for me, I could just feel his spirit. And now I really, really feel how important his body is more than ever. Like I need my sisters, and slowly they help me come back to him. They help me remove the altar that I had made again in my house, to throw away all the plant medicine, to really, like, there was one sister that really stuck by me for at least, she we're still very close, but at least she would talk to me like all the time, just making sure that I wouldn't fall back, like I would
Mm.
like. And she really helped me. And so the day actually after this prayer, I found out I'm really pregnant. And this was very shocking. And why I'm saying this, because I was gonna just like move on. Like I made a mistake again, but now I'm back with Jesus and I can just forget about it. But that was like my idea. So finding out I'm really pregnant, there was a consequence to falling from faith. And but at the same time I knew it was a blessing. I knew it was God's gift, but
Mm.
yeah, it took some time to really comprehend that God had gifted me this child and is gifting me this child. I'm currently 7 months pregnant, and how much he is doing through all of this, like the fact that he's trusting me to become a mother, that he is going to be the father because her own father, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately, is not involved. He is. I wouldn't say he's a safe person,
Mm.
spiritually, right now. So I know that God knows why he's not wanting to be involved. That is his personal choice, by the way.
Mm.
But I, as you did such a beautiful prayer for me, Julie, in the beginning of this podcast. I don't think it was on the recording, but you said how you believe that I will have a husband and that we're praying for that. And I believe that I will have a husband. But
Mhm.
until that time, I'm really understanding that Jesus is my husband and that f- honestly, he is enough.
That's
Even
right.
being or becoming a single mother, like his grace, his love, and the heart of the father. I mean, there's so much there, right? Like my
Right.
child might not in the beginning of her life, we don't know how long it's gonna last for a physical father to show up, but she will have our father in heaven, and that's like
Mm.
the soon after I was saved again, as I said, I was helped so much by sisters, but I also prayed that I would finally find a church, and I did. And that church has also helped me so much. I got baptized there.
That's awesome.
My whole pregnancy has been supernatural, especially after baptism. I have hardly any symptoms, and if I do, I can pray them away. And I'm not saying that that we should use Jesus as sort of like a crutch, but on the same hand, with faith, anything is possible.
That's right.
And that is the promise. And I now finally I really understand that a lot of what the new age does is copying
Mhm.
God's promises.
Amen. That is so true, and he wants to be our crutch, and there's nothing wrong with that. He wants to be in the details. He wants to be our everything, and I know so many of us, it's like we just need to settle in and know that Jesus is enough. He truly is, and like we had talked about, his ways are higher than our ways. His timing is perfect. So all we have to do, all you have to do is rest and be secure. I love how you said that earlier, secure in his love and trust that his ways are better than ours. So I want to also encourage people to go to your channel because I love your video where you touch more on this. What's happened to you in the last since October 23 till now. So, just for time's sake, I just love you. I love your story.
Yes.
I love what the Lord is doing in you, what He's done, and what the devil meant for harm. God is going to use it and is using it. And you are beautiful. You're a beautiful person. And I just appreciate you coming on today and sharing your powerful testimony.
Thank you so much, Julia. Anyone can that wants to know more about my story can just see my videos on my channel. But I think for now, the most important thing about all of this is to know that doesn't matter how far you are, doesn't matter how far you've been, nothing is too far or too crazy or too sinful for God. It doesn't even matter that after you're being saved, you've made a big mess. You can still run back to the Father, and
Yes.
that's how much He loves everyone. And so,
Yes.
don't ever think that your sin is too great for God to deliver
And I
you from.
and you missed him. I love that. You felt him leave when you kind of turned your back on him for a moment, but you missed him. That seed was there. He was in your heart. You just needed to return and he was there with open arms. But the love of Jesus is real and you feel it and you live and you move and you have your being in him.
Amen.
Amen. Will you
Amen.
pray for us as we close?
Yes. Father, thank you so much for Julie and for her work and her willingness to do your will for your kingdom and for this beautiful channel. And I pray that my testimony reaches the people that it is supposed to reach, and that anything I have said comes across in the way that you want it to come across, and that there's no confusion in what I've shared, but that there's liberation and revelation in my words and what I am trying to get across. And I pray that whoever is on the verge of salvation, that this message that I have shared will reach to their hearts and that they will know you, Father, know you fully, not a false version of you, not a
Yeah.
false version of your Son, Father, not a false version of what it means to truly be free and happy, but to know that freedom is in Christ. And I pray that anyone listening to this will be touched by your goodness and by your love and your grace, and that they will know you so fully that they will be free from suffering,
Mm.
real the real freedom from suffering and not the false freedom. Father, I
Yeah.
pray that any deception, any demonic strongholds are being cast out, and just that anyone listening to this is delivered from anything still torturing them and keeping them away from you, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.